Hey guys, so in this lecture, we're going to go over when to cite and how to cite. We're going to review the 3 integration strategies, and then on Thursday, you're going to receive some more They Say, I Say templates, which are basically modified versions of these basic integration strategies. And then we're also going to review when to summarize, paraphrase, and directly quote from your sources. So keep in mind that you need to cite whenever you include a direct quotation or an indirect quotation. So just because you don't have quotation marks around the paraphrase does not mean you do not have to cite it. Paraphrases and summaries from your secondary sources also have to be cited. So even though they're in your own words, you're still taking the author's ideas of the secondary source. So again, you need to make sure that they are cited. Anything you take from another person, it needs to be cited, and you need to state where you got that idea from, where that idea originated. Failure to cite, whether it's a quotation, a direct quotation, or an indirect quotation, and again, indirect quotations are paraphrases or summaries, is an example of plagiarism, so please avoid this at all costs by just citing where that original idea came from. So when you directly quote, you're telling me that these words are so important that you needed to keep them exactly as they were. So that tells me you're going to be either examining the exact words of this quotation for interpretation, you're highlighting the maybe eloquent way that an author interpreted a text, and you can't find a better way to articulate that analysis or that interpretation. Or let's say the author at the secondary source, what they have said directly supports your thesis statement or directly supports some of your supporting arguments, so you want to add some credibility to your own by quoting the exact words of the scholar. So again, direct quotes, they should be integrated, kept short, and again, they have to be cited as an in-text citation or with an in-text citation and on your works cited page. Summaries are helpful when you are providing your reader with kind of an overview of the scholarly conversation that you're entering. So if you wanted to establish some background information or offer an overview of the topic, again, the scholarly conversation that you're about to enter about your primary source, that's a great time to summarize. It's also, summaries are also useful when you're not restating a particular passage or like a specific line or two in your own words, but you are explaining the main idea of an entire source, right? A source in its entirety. Summaries also have to be cited with in-text citations though, and they have to be cited on your works cited page. So one little thing, one little caveat to add is if you are summarizing a source in its entirety in just a few sentences, unless you're pulling very specific terms and specific phrases from the secondary source, you're not going to be citing the entire source as your page number in the in-text citation. In that case, if you are again summarizing a source in its entirety in just 1 to 2 sentences, you just want to give credit to the author and then the title of the work, the title of the secondary source. You do not need to include the page numbers of that entire source. Paraphrases, I think of those as a more like specific summary. So paraphrases, you want to use those when you're clarifying a passage from the text. You want to explain a point without using the exact wording, so you're not going to be necessarily looking at the exact terms or the exact way that the author, the secondary source, has interpreted the text, but you're just taking out the idea. Or you want to explain, and this is similar to here, explain the main points of a passage. Paraphrases are also useful when you see your paper and it's flooded with quotations. You want to look back and see, okay, do I need all these quotations, all these direct quotes? Am I actually very much closely analyzing each of these direct quotes, or can I paraphrase some of them? Paraphrases, as with summaries and direct quotations, have to be cited with in-text citations and on your works cited page. All right, so I posted a file on this for primary sources when you integrate quotes from primary sources into your own paper. These integration strategies also apply for secondary sources, and as I said at the beginning of this lecture, you're going to receive more They Say and I Say templates, which you got a glimpse of in that first lecture video, and these are just modified versions of these basic integration strategies. So we're going to go over this very quickly. The first strategy is an introductory phrase in comma, so you see that here, when she states, the comma, and then you have the quote. Please note that at the end of this quotation, the period falls outside of the parenthetical citation. It does not come inside the quote. You only include the punctuation mark inside the quote if it ends in an exclamation point or a question mark. If the quote where you choose to end it ends with a comma or a period, you omit the comma or period. So the next strategy is to grammatically match the quotation with your own writing. What this would mean is if you do not tell anyone that there are quotation marks right here, the other person shouldn't know, shouldn't be able to distinguish your own writing from that of the secondary source author. The only way to distinguish who said what is through the quotation marks and the in-text citation. So here it says, however, in her essay, quote unquote, Technique of Distancing in the Fiction of Kate Chopin, scholar Joyce Coyne-Dyer maintains that unlike the technique of veiling in her previous work, Chopin, and the other quotation, knew the novel with its directness was a risk, but she probably thought that her public was ready to look into the very face of truth. The third strategy is to use an independent clause or a complete thought and a colon. So here, my complete thought or my independent clause, I'm basically paraphrasing Joyce Coyne-Dyer's thesis statement about the awakening, and then I have the direct quote of what she herself has said about, or what she herself has written about the awakening. Chopin candidly bears her protagonist's female desires and sexuality in her magnum opus, The Awakening, colon, not a semicolon, a colon, and then I have the direct quote. All right, the next thing that we are going to quickly review is how to cite in-text citations. We're just going to go over a few instances of like what happens when you're citing a work by multiple authors, when you're citing multiple works by one author. If you find that one of your sources does not fall under these categories, there is a link to Purdue OWL with a more detailed outline of how to cite different kinds of sources in your in-text as an in-text citation. All right, so the very basic one that you guys are used to is the author page style. I have been seeing a lot of people include commas in between the author's last name and the page number, but you do not need that comma. So it should just be the author's last name and then the page number. Keep in mind that the reason why I had the author's name here in the parenthetical citation is because I don't include the author's name somewhere in the sentence. If you have a secondary source written by two authors, you list both last names and the page number on which you're quoting, and you list the names in the order that they appear in the source. So here I have this quote, and then I indicate to my reader that this quote was pulled from a source written by both a person with the last name Best and the person with the last name Marcus, and this quote can be found on page 9. If you are citing a source with 3 or more authors, you only, in your in-text citation, include the first author's last name, and then you replace the other last names with et al. And just like the previous slide, you list the author's last name of the first author that appears. Et al. Means and others. So here, I would actually need a comma before et al. So I have the first person's last name, the first author's last name, comma, et al., and then you had that period there for the abbreviation, and then I had the page number, and then I have a period to end the sentence. So as stated earlier in this lecture, this is not a direct quote, it's a paraphrase, but I still need to cite it. So let's say you want to use 2 secondary sources, 2 different articles written by the same author. How you would indicate which article you're citing from is to use a shortened version of the title for the specific work you're citing in your in-text citation. You put the short titles of books in italics, and the short titles of articles in quotation marks. You guys already did this when you were writing your Oresteia essay. Your in-text citation was the italicized format of one of the play titles with the page number. But because most of you will be working with scholarly articles, just make sure that shortened title is in quotation marks. All right, so just an example of this. We have here 2 articles by the same author. So the author is Leitner, and says, has argued that computers are not useful tools for small children, and this is from his article, the shortened title, Too Soon. So this is telling me when I have a in-text citation like this might not actually be the name of the source, the full name of the source, it's just a shortened version of it. And then I had the page number on which I found that information. And again, these are articles or a shorter work because they are in quotation marks. If you want to cite 2 books by the same author, and this is again what you guys did for the Oris Dia essay, you have these direct quotes from this first text, and this first book is italicized, and then you had the page number, and then I have another direct quote from a second book by that same author with that same page number. So you can see in this citation, the way the author has signaled it, the way the writer has signaled it is by saying, additionally, Murray argues, and has the quote from the second text. You definitely want to signal that you are still talking about the same author when you cite a second source by that same author, and this is even more important when you switch between secondary sources. So let's say between these 2 quotes from Murray, I include one from Jackson, right? I can't just switch from Murray to Jackson to Murray without indicating who was saying what. So let's say I don't include the author's name in my sentence, but again, I still want to cite multiple works by the same author. You can see that in the sentence here. Visual studies, because it is such a new discipline, may be quote-unquote too easy. In my sentence, I don't attribute this quote to this man or woman named Elkins with the last name Elkins. So because I do not include that last name in my sentence, I need to include it in my in-text citation, in my parenthetical citation. Here is another instance of when I would use the comma. So if I am including the author's last name in my parenthetical citation and I am citing multiple works by that author, it would be the author's last name, comma, and then the shortened title of the source. And here, this parentheses should actually be deleted, and it should just read 63. So just to clarify that, the ending should be like this. And that's how it end my parenthetical citation. Even if you are not citing multiple works by the same author, if your author's name of the secondary source is not mentioned in the sentence, you need to have the author's last name followed by a comma and then a shortened title of the work in the parenthetical citation. So as stated before, if one of your sources does not fall under the formats that we went over just now, just go to Canvas and click on Purdue OWL's page, and you will most likely find the guidelines for citing on the Purdue OWL page. All right, I wanted to look at this one last example. This is from your sample secondary source paper that I handed out earlier this week. You can see here that this quotation ends with QTD period, and this should be a lowercase I in Ben's V, and then the page. We actually went over an example like this at the very beginning of the year when we did a plagiarism unit. The reason why this quoted thing is here, this QTD abbreviation, is to indicate to my reader that this quote, frequently applied her handkerchief to her eyes, is a quote that I read from this source, not from the Des Moines Daily News. So I'm making clear to my reader I did not actually read this article mentioned and found by Linda Ben's V, but I read this quote from the news article in Linda Ben's V's article, Murder, She Wrote. One additional thing to note in this works cited entry, so this is what it would look like, this cited source in the works cited page, is that in the new MLA 8, you actually do not need the original publication of the source. It's enough to just cite the information that you originally read. All right, I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask and come see me. And then also remember that Mrs. Trowski, your librarian, is also a great resource.